At Charity Charge, our mission is to power yours. Most banks and financial service providers weren't built for nonprofits. They don't understand your structure or how you operate. That's why we exist. We proudly serve more than 3,000 organizations across the US, offering tools built exclusively for the sector. From credit cards and expense management to bookkeeping and gift cards, every solution is designed to help you minimize operations and supercharge your impact. And we're more than just financial services. We're an educational community. We share resources every day on our podcast, blog, and webinars to help you stay informed, compliant, and empowered. Visit charitycharge.com to learn more and join the community.
Hi, everyone. This is Stephen Garton, the host of the Charity Charge Show. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Dan Chu, who is the executive director of the Sierra Club Foundation. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks. Glad to join today, and hopefully I can be of some help to all the folks that follow you.
Definitely. I'm super excited about this episode, just with some of the legacy in my family. Before we hit record, I was telling you about my great uncle Joel, who was a big supporter of Sierra Club's mission. And I really helped develop my interest in the environment and the world that we have here, inspired by him. And, he was a big supporter of your work. So I think that this is really cool to have you on. And I recently, on a personal note, welcomed our first child this summer
Oh,
to the world,
congratulations.
right? And a prior guest that I interviewed maybe a couple episodes ago was a gentleman, David Gottfried, who is the founder of the U.S. Green Building Council. And to me, I have always marveled and appreciated the outdoors. I've appreciated the environment, wildlife, and I want to talk, obviously about your mission. So can you share with us, what's the purpose, what's the mission, some of the history behind the Sierra Club Foundation?
Yeah. So the Sierra Club Foundation is the charitable C3 entity that fiscally sponsors all the charitable work of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is a membership organization. So between the two of us, I'd say right now, at the highest level, our mission has always been around making sure that people enjoy exploring and ultimately protect people and planet. And I'd say a couple of frames that I put out there is right now, we as a society are facing three existential threats to all of humanity and other living beings as well. So the first I'd say is really we're at this unprecedented extinction crisis. As we know right now, thousands, if not millions of species are at risk of going extinct. So we have an extinction crisis to deal with. Secondly, and connected with that is the climate crisis. Every year we continue to see more and more challenges to keeping our climate stable and keeping people safe. So the second is that climate crisis. And then the third is really the crisis around, as you were mentioning, the increasing disconnect of people with nature and the outdoors. And we think that's so important because we fundamentally are, living beings that are connected with nature, but also from a societal and I guess you could say activist approach. Having people be connected with places they love, ultimately, we think is critical for people to stand up and do whatever they can to protect those places as well. So we focus very deeply on these three existential crises, and then I can talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing to address those and to move forward on some programs and build collective power as well.
That would be awesome. I mean, when I think about the Sierra Club, can you give me a rough sense before we go deeper on those three areas? How long ago the Sierra Club as itself, as that brand name Sierra Club, how long has it been around?
Yeah, so the Sierra Club officially was established 1892. Actually, I think the date was May 28th. And the reason I remember that actually happens to be my birthday, although I was born well after 1892. And it was established by John Muir and other folks who cared deeply about protecting beautiful places in the Sierras in California. And they really had this theory of change that in some ways has stayed with us to this day, which was to take people outdoors on outings, get them to see the amazing, wonderful nature around them, but also to connect with each other in nature. And then that would actually create increasingly powerful and connected sets of people that would do whatever it takes to protect nature. So 1892, that means what? 36 years later, the Sierra Club's still going. The Sierra Club Foundation was established in 1960 as a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
And help us understand what was this kind of dual entity structure. The Sierra Club organization, the 501(c)(4), had existed since the 1800s, and then now you have the C3, the foundation that you're running. What's the purpose of both of those entities at the highest level?
Yeah, so back in the mid 60s, fortunately, both the Sierra Club Foundation and the Sierra Club existed. Back in the mid 1960s, the Sierra Club was actually a 501(c)(3), which means they could get tax deductible donations. And at the time, the executive director, David Brower, ran a national campaign to, believe it or not, stop the damming of the Grand Canyon. There were proposals to dam the entire Grand Canyon to make a large reservoir out of it back in the 60s. And so there's a major push on that. The Sierra Club ran a full page ad, and I believe it was the New York Times, saying that damming the Grand Canyon would be the same. You would be just like flooding the Sistine Chapel. And so, based on that, they got a lot of letters flooding into Congress and decision makers in the White House. And the IRS came after the Sierra Club saying that they had inappropriately used C3 dollars to lobby. So the IRS pulled the C3 status from the Sierra Club. Unfortunately, the Sierra Club Foundation still existed as a C3. And so people that still wanted to give tax donations, including foundations and that kind of thing, began giving to the Sierra Club Foundation. And over time, the foundation and the club developed a business relationship where we can fund programs at the Sierra Club that are strictly doing charitable work per the definition by the Internal Revenue Service. But the Sierra Club as a C4 can bring in non-tax deductible dollars. So most money that they get from membership tends to be non-tax deductible C4 dollars. And those C4 dollars are a little more flexible. They can do unlimited lobbying with those dollars. They can solicit those C4 members to join the Sierra Club's political activities, including a 527 and some of their PACs as well. And then the Sierra Club has 64 state chapters in every state and some territories. And those chapters are within that C4 frame. So they do a lot of lobbying also at the state legislative level as well through the chapter.
Appreciate you sharing that. And to give some context, and both to you, but really to any of the listeners here, we work with 3,000 plus nonprofits at Charity Charge, and we see this model a lot where essentially there's an organization that are of similar missions and they have a C3 and they also have a C4 that work hand in hand. So it's a smart model and definitely one that, exists across the country. So I'm glad that it's proven effective for your organization as well. Dan, we started the episode, you were highlighting three distinct areas that you work in. The third area that you had mentioned was around the outdoors, wildlife. Can you talk about that and then move backwards to the second and first for us?
Sure.
Just to give a sense for the listener here about really the impact, but also, the mission that Sierra Club provides.
Yeah, I would love to. So that third, what I consider as an existential crisis for all of us, is that disconnect from nature. And in particular, some of the things that we focus in on is to make sure that we get people outdoors. So the Sierra Club across every state and many communities within those states have volunteers who are trained, and then they take people out on local outings. And so that outing could be, going for a hike, which is what we would expect the Sierra Club to be sponsoring. But those outings have also been other activities, let's say kayaking or biking. Occasionally, there's also service outings where they will partner up with other entities and have people come in and do a trail maintenance project on that day or some kind of water improvement project. So there's a lot of what are called local outings, and those are led by volunteers and branded as Sierra Club outings. Those are oftentimes connected with our state chapters that I mentioned as well. They also have had outings in the past that were based more on demographics. So, it's an outing for people under 30 that want to get together, or maybe a LGBTQ outing focus and that kind of thing as well.
And I would point
So,
out, if you don't mind, Dan, while you have each, let's say the 50 states and the 50 chapters, there are also, if people are listening to this and just interested in their local community, for example, in Austin, there's an Austin group that organizes
yeah.
all sorts of these activities that people are interested in getting out into nature, getting more involved.
Yeah, exactly. No, thanks for pointing that out. There are these 64 chapters, 13 chapters in California and the rest in one in every other state and territories like Puerto Rico. And then many of those chapters have groups under those chapters. And those groups, to your point, may be at a community level or a county level or that kind of thing as well. And so that's even the next level down in the grassroots of people who are engaging in their own communities. And then a lot of these local outings either tier to those groups or to the chapters there. The other kind of outings that the Sierra Club provides are what are called national and international outings. And those are more like paid trips, like you would see a National Geographic do or some of these other entities where you can sign up to go on a week outing to, an international destination. That's also led by Sierra Club volunteers. It has a much higher level of coordination, support, insurance, that kind of thing as well. And if you go on the Sierra Club website, you'll all see a list of these international and national outings that are paid outings for people to join as well. And so I would say there's just getting people outdoors through the outings. But in conjunction with that are a number of policy work that the Sierra Club does over the years, if it's legislative or at the state level, to get more funding for particularly getting kids outdoors. We were instrumental years ago in having the fourth grader pass for every fourth grader to have free access to the national parks, as one example. And then we also have what's called military outdoors, where we work and are led by veterans to do outdoors with veterans around getting outdoors, but frankly, around dealing with the trauma and the impacts of having served. And being outdoors has enormous benefits and healing powers as well.
Awesome. Walk us through now, moving on to the two other core pillars.
Yeah, so the second one, well, the one I guess it ties to outings is really thinking about protecting land, water, and wildlife. And a lot of times those outings are to places that are under threat or places that have recently been protected. And they also provide an opportunity to build more long-term public support or even local support for those places. But in addition, as many of you know, we're in a very troubling and difficult time with the Trump administration. And there are a lot of very serious threats to our public lands or public waters, and many of the laws that regulate the health and welfare of those lands and spaces. So we work a lot on public lands policy, federal land policy. We also partner with many tribal leaders to work with tribes on opportunities to protect land surrounding and within their boundaries. And they've also been powerful partners to help us get new national monuments designated. And a national monument can be designated by the President of the United States for particular protective values. So during the Biden administration, for instance, we, towards the end of his administration, got the Chuckwalla National Monument designated surrounding Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California. And that was really dependent on activism and coordination with over, I don't know, probably close to 30 tribal entities and leaders and small businesses in the community. Bears Ears National Monument's another example, an extension of the Grand Canyon National Park is a national monument. All of those tribal leaders have played a critical role in moving forward collective protection. So we really, 4 or 5 years ago, honed in on what was called 30 by 30 to push for permanent protection of 30% of all ecosystems by 2030. Given where we are now, it's much more of a challenge.
What do you think for people? Yeah, I mean, just because, if you don't mind, if we go there, for a
Sure.
second, you know, here in America, we did have, the majority of people did vote for Trump, right? So what is the other side of how is the other side, or how would other people think about this? And what would be a way that's not, if it's possible, that it's not controversial, right? To find the common ground. There's a lot of things that I think the administration's trying to do, right? To national security, energy independence, and help educate me, please. But I feel like it's some of those issues that we are reducing or creating less regulation around these areas. But then I think that what you're saying is that comes in conflict with, the mission and the values of the Sierra Club. What's really going on?
Yeah, that's a big question. During the last tax bill, which was labeled by Trump the big beautiful tax bill or whatever, there was at one point a push to start selling off our federal public lands for ostensibly for revenue. And that ended up not making it in the final bill for a couple of reasons.
I
One,
just saw a whole thing on 60 Minutes related to federal lands in, I believe it was Montana or Wyoming,
yeah,
on that issue.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually, early on in my career, I was the executive director for the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, which is the state affiliate of National Wildlife Federation. And the vast majority of our members were hunters and anglers who cared deeply about public lands. And so for them, it was really, they equate public lands with freedom and democracy, because at the end of the day, they don't have to be paying 10 or 20 or $30,000 to access beautiful places. They can do that for free, because it's public land that's held for the benefit of all. So it is a very, how do I say it? A very charged issue whenever they hear that federal lands are going to be sold out from under them, because the lands that'll get sold first are the ones that are most valuable for other benefits like wildlife habitat or scenery or that kind of thing as well. So my point there is that I think many of the people that voted for Trump didn't vote for him to do a number of the things that are happening right now uh, to our public lands legacy, to our wildlife value. I remember being in Wyoming, and I was in Yellowstone in Lamar Valley, and there were some wolves off in the distance, and someone was just watching with a spotting scope who watched them constantly. And that person was very conservative, had some very conservative bumper stickers on them, but they were so excited to see the wolves and they wanted me to share in that experience. And I would say over and over again, that shared experience outdoors, particularly having a wildlife experience like that, crosses any, artificial boundaries of political divisiveness or what party you're affiliated with. And so we really think that our outings work is also a powerful tool. We hope to bring together people that are seemingly at odds because maybe the only time they engage with each other is reading something online, but to actually have in-person connection in the outdoors is a powerful way, I think, to heal those political rifts that we're unfortunately dealing with.
It makes me think a little bit about when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California. He was trying to, push a lot of things towards environmental conservation. And when I heard him speak about it, they were trying to garner support in a lot of different ways. But the long term approach just wasn't getting the support that they needed. And when they
Right.
really looked at the data, they really found that they made it about a public health because of the pollution and what that does to lung disease, lung cancer, and making it to the here and now. And hey, this is an issue that's affecting yourself, your children right now. Pollution, right? The air we breathe. They were able to make inroads. So I'm just curious how, whether you believe with that or not. I guess that's the first thing. But it seems like an avenue for Sierra Club to be able to grow their mission is this first piece you're talking about of connecting people directly, getting them out to see what's at stake.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and this is a framing I've been thinking a lot about it as think about my own personal resilience in these challenging times for many of the things I care deeply about. And I think of it in three ways. One is that I really need to have a strong sense of a personal peace. And so, going out and walking the dog for a hike or going out and just having quiet time, getting away from that barrage of information that gets thrown at us all the time. It's just so important to have that peace that I think for your mental health and frankly for your physical health as well. So just I've been doubling down and thinking about how to make sure I have that inner peace more and more and be intentional about that. I think that's important to then result in having the capacity and the orientation to build fellowship with others in community. Because if you're angry and not at peace, it's really hard to be an effective community member and someone that other people want to work with, right? And that is just so important because we must continue to build and work in community to then have the collective courage that we all need, knowing that we've got each other's backs and that we care deeply about each other and that we're part of a social network to continue to push for protecting the things and people that we love, as well as advancing what we think must happen as we move into the future.
A lot of what we're talking about reminds me of a famous Native American proverb. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree, and there's another quote that we think of, and it's a little bit tougher quote, but a real one, which is that for environmental protection, our victories are temporary and our losses are permanent. And
Mm.
so you just have to live with that, that the best you can do is continue to have those victories and continue to hold off what may end up being, permanent losses. Once you lose, you know, that place, that pond that you used to go to development or whatever, you're not going to get it back. So that's something else that I've just over the years have come to, just come to grips with and recognize that from time to time you are going to have very difficult, devastating losses of places that you love, but you can't stop continuing to push for those victories and just keep hopefully moving to a new system and paradigm that ultimately prevents wholesale loss and extraction of these resources.
What's your sense in the today's climate, right, from a business and a technology standpoint? There's obviously so much investment and talk around AI. There's a tremendous amount of energy that AI is using. There's a tremendous
Yes.
amount of construction around data centers, but it also seems to be a economic engine for, the future of America. It also seems to be a national security issue, this kind of all this hype around the AI race. So, yeah, how does Sierra Club think about that side? Like even specifically what's going on with AI and all the resources that go towards it?
Yeah, great question. Well, there's a couple of ways to go at it. For the Sierra Club and all of our chapters, we are seeing and very concerned about this huge, we think it's quite speculative investment in data centers across the nation. I had a call with actually, I went to a conference that a number of investors came together on. And one investment firm said that I believe it was like $400 billion in new investments have been put into data centers in the last, I believe, 12 to 18 months, which equates, if all of them ran full scale, would equate to the energy needs of about 70 million new homes. There's only about 135 million homes in all of the US. So almost more than 50% increase. So in addition to where's that power coming from, how do where's the capacity to actually have that distributed? And then for us, who's on the hook to pay for that increase in cost and price for building the infrastructure for those utility rates? We're already seeing increasing concern and even political pressure at the local level as people see their utility rates are going up.
And that's where I think things hit closest to home because my wife and I bought our first home about this December will be 4 years. And it's an older home. It's from originally built in 1935. And
Nice.
from the moment we moved in, I put in LED bulbs and moved to all sorts of energy efficient appliances, etc. The utility bill is still through the roof. And I saw it was kind of a satirical almost like newspaper type of cartoon that was just showing. I wish I had it because a picture's worth 1,000 words, and here I'll butcher it. But just this kind of stereotypical millennial saying, like, I thought LED lights were supposed to like lower my electric bill, but why does it just keep rising each year?
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And so,
And that's where I think there's a farce with a lot of this stuff, and I look at it with, like, my water bill, for example, we're here in Austin, that's through the roof as well, right? And so we can push a lot of stuff, and it irritates the heck out of me here when I get all sorts of notices from the city of, "Hey, you're only allowed to, like, water your lawn 1 day a week," and they're just putting all of these constraints on the
restrictions. Yeah.
end individual, but then I started to look up to see, like, what the commercial water use is.
Yeah, yeah,
Also,
right.
I can read you, like, check this out. This article, because now I wanna pull up City of Austin, wasted water, leaky pipes. Check this out on the commercial side. Yeah, City of Austin water pipes are leaking billions of gallons of treated water annually. In 2024, city pipes leaked over 9 billion gallons, a substantial increase, costing utility impacting conservation efforts. I can read out more. And it's, now here I'm kind of going on, and this episode's obviously about you and the Sierra Club. But on the individual level, I don't mind doing my part, right? And I want to do my part, but it's so frustrating when I see commercial municipality side not actually fixing the problem, just pushing the
Yeah,
problem
I
down on the individual.
Yeah, and ultimately, unfortunately, it comes down to a different kind of power. on why that's happening too, right? It's like you don't have the high paid lobbyists in the state legislature. You're not, putting thousands of dollars into the elections and all that kind of thing. And that is just as important because what we see happening, and it's always happened, is if it's these large players where the bulk of the resources are being used, they're externalizing the cost on your average citizen. They're taking the profit and then the costs associated with making that profit, they push it down on the taxpayer or the ultimate consumer. And it is, we believe, the responsibility for utility companies, particularly those that are, public utility companies. They have a responsibility and a duty to look out first for that individual customer, not for the large corporate entity that's there. Yeah, getting back to data centers, we are pushing on making sure that the energy needs of those data centers come from clean sources, solar in particular. Unfortunately, in some cases, they've used those as an excuse to extend, older, dirty coal plants to continue to be online. But, the cost of kilowatts from coal plants is still a lot more expensive. The Sierra Club, as a C4, they do engage occasionally in elections for like public utility commissions, and just engage that at the decision-making level. They also provide studies, very well-vetted economic studies for utility companies on why it makes sense to go to, clean energy like solar and efficiency as much more cost-effective than investing in a new gas plant or something like that as well. So the Sierra Club, in addition to doing that advocacy work I talk about, they also do a lot of policy and engage in economics as well, because those decision makers need to be provided, the facts and then put on notice and feel the pressure from their constituents to go with those facts and make the right decisions.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious. I want to talk a lot of our audience because, the end groups that we serve are individuals that are running nonprofits, executive directors
Yeah.
of organizations. So many, roughly 95% of all nonprofits are under $1 million in revenue. So those organizations, depending on their size, might have 1 to 3 to 4 to 5 full-time employees, or they could just be all volunteer led, or maybe one executive director with, with board members and such. Can you give us a perspective for you? How many people are you leading at the Sierra Club Foundation?
Yeah, so we're kind of strange in that I have 11 staff with a $100 million budget. And the way we do that, the Sierra Club has a little over 700 staff. And so, we provide, as I said, we raise a lot of that C3 charitable dollars and then fund staff to deliver on charitable work on the club side. So it's not exactly like, it's not that we just have 11 staff and a budget associated with the 11 staff. So just want to make that clear. But largely my staff are broken out into four areas. One around our finance team, the other is around our initiative to be an effective asset owner and catalyze the shift of trillions of dollars in policy and follow on investments. Would love to talk about that in a little bit. And then the third is around kind of governance, engaging our board of directors, and elevating our profile and our service for people who want to support us in a variety of ways.
The area there that I think you wanted to go deeper on was, did you say the policy and follow on investments?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about that. And I'd love for you also to talk about the areas in which you're able to successfully fundraise. We just had across the US Giving Tuesday, and there's not a leader of a nonprofit that I've ever met that says they have all the funding that they need for their mission, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, share with us how you all think about that. And my ears heard, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. Follow on is about how do we grow these areas of fundraising to do even more. And I think there maybe could be some wisdom or some takeaways that some of these executive directors listening to could think about for their local organizations that they're running.
Yeah, and so, and once again, I don't know if this makes sense just given the scale that we're at versus the smaller NGOs. So hopefully this will be helpful despite that. So the Sierra Club Foundation, on a given day has anywhere from 170 to $200 million in assets under management. So what that means is as we raise money, some of those are bequests and they go into an endowment. We have a charitable annuity program where people can sign up and have an annuity with us where they give us, large donation on the front end, and then we pay them a monthly annuity until they pass. And then, of course, when we get multi-year grants as well. So the reason I mention that is that we're an asset owner with, that kind of asset base. And we think about how can we have as much impact as we can have with those dollars. So first, the impact obviously is as a grantee to the Sierra Club, providing those dollars in a way that create programmatic impact at the club. The second is impact as a active shareholder, because a lot of our investments are going to be with publicly held companies through mutual funds. So we show up with shareholder resolutions, vote our proxies as shares, engage in a variety of networks, and collectively work to engage with many companies that we care about. So that they're more sustainable and push for a better world. The other way I mentioned is as a co-investor, and ideally at times a catalytic investor. So we will look for places where relatively small early investment that's also patient. So we think of it as early and patient capital can be catalytic in attracting other significant dollars for that particular investment. So one example is early on, we provided a low interest loan to the company called Navajo Power, who is working to get solar capacity built on the Navajo reservation. And so we provide them early below market loan dollars to attract other dollars in. And over time, they've brought in additional millions of dollars to make that project a reality. The last thing I'd say is that we are now really thinking about what is our role then collectively in driving system level thinking and system level investing? Because climate change is a systemic risk. What that means is you can do whatever you can with an individual company to make them better or to make them more sustainable. But you really need to think about, like, at a global level, what systemic change needs to be made through policy, through moving trillions of dollars in decision making to ultimately get at that target of which is about $10 trillion a year globally needs to be shift towards a clean economy.
So what are when you think about the systems thinking and helping actually move the needle on that 10 trillion, what are some of the actions that the organization's taking or just some of the thoughts moving forward?
Yeah, so I'd say, at the at the scale of trillions of dollars is working with a number of experts on fiduciary duty for entities like public pension funds. So, in the US alone, public pension funds are probably 10 trillion or more dollars in collective assets. And they have a fiduciary duty to their beneficiaries to think 10, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years out, right? I mean, if you're a new public employee and you're 30 years old, you need that pension to be there for you 50 years from now, for instance. So there are a very strong argument, and we believe a responsibility. The public pension funds have a fiduciary duty to think about outsized systemic risks like climate change and how that impacts their portfolios and dollars that they have invested for their beneficiaries, and to adjust now for those risks that are compounding and becoming worse by the year because their portfolio will be under extreme duress, as soon as 10 or 15 years from now from that kind of risk. So that's one example, is really thinking about who are the asset owners that are collectively making decisions on trillions of dollars, and what is their responsibility to be much more proactive and think about how they're investing, thinking about ways that are much more systemic versus what's often called idiosyncratic, and you're just thinking about individual investments or companies.
One effort that I'm familiar with, and I just started really through the podcast and some other guests that I had on, is a model out there called the ACE Act, which is Accelerating Charitable Efforts. And really,
Mm,
as I understand it, the goal there is to modify the rules on DAFs and private foundation. Basically, the focus is to increase the speed and transparency of charitable giving from DAFs and private foundations. And and I did look it up. I think it goes back to the 70s is the last time that Congress changed it. But right now, foundations only have to grant out 5% of the
yeah,
average
that's
of
right.
their assets over the prior 3-year term, 5% a year. Let's just to simplify it,
Yeah, it's
right?
5% of yours the target. Yeah.
And so, my thought around that is, well, and I think part of this movement where people are starting to talk more about this is what if instead that was 6%, 7%, 10%, pick your number, right? But some amount more than 5%, it would mean more dollars now that are going out. And part of it is how much impact that could make. And hey, oftentimes the economic side of it too is it's cheaper to solve these challenges now than hold on to this, let the other 95% continue to grow and just grant out, a small percent, 5% of the 95%. So I'm just curious. I don't know if I was coherent there and kind of what I just said to you. I can
Yeah,
I can
yeah. No,
rephrase
I
or
think
your thoughts around that side of it
yeah,
to tap in when we think about systemic change, like how do we get, but we have all these dollars and we're only giving away 5% each year.
yeah, I think there's 2 ways that we think about it. One is, yes, increasing 5% and for foundations to really think deeply about, like, if you have a plan to be in perpetuity, why is perpetuity the plan? And if you think about why you exist, even going back to your founders, is now the moment to really double down? And we would say yes. The other piece is that other 95%, what are you investing it in? And
Totally.
what kind of impact does that have? And as I've said to my board and to boards of other foundations and to private investors, every single dollar you own has impact, either positive or negative. There's no such thing as a dollar that's neutral anymore. Because if you're making money in the current stock market, it's on an extractive economy, right? And so be really honest with yourself and intentional about saying, okay, we have a $5 billion endowment and we're giving out 5% of that. What are we doing with that other $4+ billion? What kind of impact is it having now? And is that actually counter to what we want to achieve with that relatively small amount of grant money? And if so, how can we move that money to invest in things that are much more consistent with where we want to go to? And also, are there opportunities to create greater strategic linkages between our investment strategy and our granting strategy? So I think some foundations, think highly of MacArthur Foundation or Kresge are doing that. I believe it's California Endowment, made a commitment to 100% impact with their investment portfolio. So yeah, I think that is in that space, we feel we can be particularly helpful and value add is talking with fellow foundations around what are you doing with the other 95% and provide opportunities for shared co-investing and that kind of thing. One example of that is there's, with the pullback on funding that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act for clean energy and particularly community energy projects in underserved communities, projects that were going to get federal funding are no longer going to get federal funding. But there's still like pretty good projects to move forward. And so there's been a growing list of other foundations and individual investors have come together and said, okay, how can we fill that gap of funding for, let's say, a solar project in Memphis, Tennessee, or whatever, with impact investing from a foundation and or from a individual donor. So that is happening, and I think that's kind of the evolution in the future of the impact that foundations can have is in this investment space in addition to the straight granting space.
Got it. I'm curious, Dan, how many board members do you have at your foundation?
Right now, I'd
Approximately.
say 14.
Got it. So one of
Yeah, I'd
the
say somewhere between 12 and 16 to me is a ideal amount.
Yeah, from my perspective, regardless of size of nonprofit organization, there is a common thread of success linked to the quality of the board members and the
Absolutely.
dynamic that they have with the leader, right? With the executive
Yeah,
director
with the
and
staff. Yeah.
right. So I'm curious from your perspective, you've been at running the Sierra Club Foundation, particularly since 2016, so almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
What would be your advice for other nonprofit leaders that maybe they don't have a great board, right? And they're challenged. They think the board's not committed, not doing enough, providing mission creep. What advice would you give for them to try to fill out? And there's a tension there. It's interesting too because from a pure governance perspective, the board elects the or hires rather hires and fires the
Yeah,
executive
yeah,
director.
they're the supervisor for the executive director or the
Right.
CEO.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
advice do you have around boards and creating a successful board for other nonprofit leaders?
Well, for me, the top is like real clarity on what you want to do together. So I think there's, and that can be through strategic planning, through clarity of goals and outcomes. And then the second piece to me is not what we're doing, but also how we do it together. And so that's a culture conversation. Within the culture conversation, I think are, government governance conversations. How does the staff and board interact? So for my board, I feel really fortunate. I have a great board of directors and a high trust level with them because we're very transparent, but we're also really clear about the roles and responsibilities, both amongst the board and then between the board and staff. So, for instance, my board has very clear committees. We have descriptions of what is the role of every committee and what's their responsibility, clarity on the roles of individual board directors when we go out to recruit a new board director and say, here, everything from time commitment we're asking you to whatever. And then third thing we have is our executive committee serves as the nominating committee. And so we have a regular check-in on a board matrix and say, okay, here's a gap. We really need someone with nonprofit finance experience because someone just got off our board. Well, let's prioritize that. Or we don't have a board member that represents the Midwest. We have mostly folks on the coast. So let's elevate that geographic need. Or the demographics on our board are too homogenous. So we will, at least a few times a year, starting with the executive committee and then the whole board, have real conversations about like, in this coming year, we've got 2 or 3 board members cycling off. We'd like to get 3 or 4 new board members on. Here are the priority attributes of those board directors. And then let's brainstorm about connections and relationships we have and bring those folks on. I think that committee structure piece is really important as well because our board meetings tend to be quarterly and they're 4 hours long. And the reason we can have increasingly we have those board meetings be strategic conversations versus reporting back. And so we do a bulk of our work in individual committee meetings. And then a lot of times we can have a consent agenda with a number of items that just get, we expect our board to look at all the materials ahead of time, be ready. And to get that business done is really dependent on the board as a whole, trusting the individual committees and their work. So I would just say there's all that. And at the end of the day, we do annual goals and outcomes that the board approves. Those annual goals and outcomes also become my performance goals and objectives. And then we do regular check-ins as well. So that kind of alignment on what are the annual priorities, what are the expectations, very transparent about getting feedback on my performance. And then the flip side, our board members are very open and want feedback on their performance as supporting the organization from me and others as well. So I just think that trust and transparency and being open to feedback and, as I say, assume positive intent at all times is super important.
And how do you translate that also? I want to say down, and that's probably not the right term, but to your staff, right?
Let's say our board approves goals and annual outcomes. And then once that's approved, goals and annual outcomes document, which is like a 2-pager. Let's work with the executive committee and say, okay, this outcome is the purview of this board committee, and the staff lead for that outcome is X. So very specific. Here's a committee, here's a staff outcome, a staff assignment, and that outcome was part of the overall board approved outcome for that year. And to make it as a smarty outcome, so it's tangible and measurable and that kind of thing. And then those flow down to individual performance objectives for the staff as well. So when we're doing performance objectives for the staff, they feel like they're connected to the overall priorities of the organization, if that makes sense as well.
Awesome. And what's your take? I mean, there's a lot of different leadership styles out there, right? And I think that there's multiple ways to do things, of course, right? And there's some bad ways to do things as well, right? What's been your success and also lessons learned, like things that have humbled you with leading people?
Yeah, I think for me,
And especially when
was
they're
frank.
not hitting the goal or they're not performing at where you think that they could be or should be, both for themselves and the organization.
Yeah. So I think one is just being really clear around roles and responsibilities and what the expectations are at the front end, to not wait for a year and then do an evaluation at year end, but actually to have more regular, with my direct reports, I have weekly check ins with my team of 5 that are 4 that I directly manage. as well as weekly one-on-ones, and they can be half hours or whatever. And then we keep a running agenda there, like this is the item that comes up. Here's who's accountable for follow up on that particular item. But I also find at the end of the day for my employee and for me as well, I can go back to that, 10 months later and say, oh gosh, I can't believe that that was something that was done. So I think clarity of roles, responsibilities. I think I've learned as an executive leader, I tend to be more like big picture. I'm not, how do I say it? I'm more of a leaper than a, very step by step person. And so I find that over time, if I'm clear about like, here's the objective or outcome that we want to get to, if it's me and the board or get a feedback from the staff. Do you think that's doable? Yet at the same time, you want it to be a little bit of a stretch. And then you got to trust the staff to be creative enough to figure out how to get there and not be too prescriptive. Particularly when I think people are at a director level, they should be at that level of professionalism where they can, figure out the strategy and how to get to that outcome. And then, if you hit your desired outcomes all the time, that means that that outcome was not ambitious enough or not enough of a stretch. And if you never hit it, maybe it's a staff performance level, or maybe it was an unreasonable outcome that you put in front of them. So, yeah, so that's kind of where I am. And I just feel really fortunate that the staff I have, some of them have been there now going on 15 years or whatever. We have a very open, trusting relationships. They all care deeply about the organization and they all have high fidelity about their personal ethics when it comes to, working, particularly since we're mostly remote, you know, it'd be really easy to just kind of slack off. But I think in a small team, it's hard to slack off because everybody, you just don't have a lot of places to hide and you don't have a lot of, you don't have a lot of tasks that more than one person is doing. So everybody feels like they're part of a team that's small and that they have their role and responsibilities. And the last thing I'd say is we have a staff person who also is very relational and thinks constantly about like, well, let's make sure we have check-ins. Let's have like a fun all staff, remote gathering and just make sure that people still have that sense of team and enjoy being with each other.
I think that that's really critical. We just right before I recorded this, we went out, had a team lunch, and we do that every day at Charity Charge. We go out, and it's just great. The conversations that come out of breaking bread, and inevitably a work thing or whatever will come up, but just creating that sense of camaraderie has been really important for us. We were for a number of years in person, and then we went fully remote during COVID, and then we're remote for about 2.5 years following that. Here, we were just able to figure it out to make it in person now. And pretty much 5 days a week we're together, small team. And that's worked for us. So I think the
Yeah, no,
camaraderie piece and
that's
having
super
fun,
helpful.
you got to.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately well, yeah, about 3 or 4 of my staff are not in California, I think 4 of them. Yeah, so we probably see each other in person as a staff once a year, maybe twice a
Wow.
year collectively, yeah. So it's, it's hard to stay connected, and I think it's just a trick of, like, regular updates, we do weekly check-ins on staff and, but it is, it's a challenge in this world, and Sierra Club, you can imagine, with 730 staff, many of them remote, working out of their homes is a whole 'nother level of challenge. So I think that sense of
Well, they got to be passionate and certainly mission oriented
yeah, yeah, they
for it
gotta
to
be
work.
passionate, and then it's this balance between, like, clarity on roles and responsibility with also having self-agency as an individual to do the work, and so, yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. Well, the Sierra Club also has over 9,000, volunteer leaders as well. So it has 700 staff, 1,000 volunteer leaders, 64 chapters. It's a lot of challenge, and back in late 21, we developed a 2030 strategic framework. And, you know, it's communications, but it's also context. As a communicator, it's like you can do all the communications you want, but if you don't have consistent context on how it fits into the larger frame, it's really hard for people to retain that information because it's just information.
Totally. Dan, to close out this interview as we sit here together, I'm just curious from your perspective, right? It's a broad question, so reflect on it how you wish. When you think about mentors that you've had, What's the best piece of advice someone's given you?
Well, 2 things. One is knowing always reflect on you don't know what you don't know. So I don't care how senior leader you are, there's always some blind spot that you're not aware of. And that creates a discipline to really be inquiring, even with people that you would normally say, oh, well, they're just a coordinator or they're low down the food chain or they're only 30 years old or whatever. So I'm constantly in a learning mode and thinking about it like, I don't know what I don't know, particularly in these times where so much is changing, right? So that's one thing I would put out there. The second thing is to take care of yourself. This is really difficult, hard work. You can fall into beating yourself up because, something didn't get accomplished or you lost a campaign or, there's a variety of things. But you have to take care of yourself because work is just part of your life. You have a family. You have to show up in a lot of ways throughout your life. And if you aren't taking care of yourself, you're not able to take care of others. And you're certainly not able to take care of the mission of the organization. So I'd say those things, you don't know what you don't know, and really don't feel you're being indulgent when you're trying to take care of yourself as well.
Awesome. I'll pull in both of those. The latter ones, especially, I really try to focus on how do I take care of myself. And one of the things I share that we did here is I did it first and found immense value out of it. So I sponsored all my employees to do TM training, which is transcendental meditation, right? And it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
it was
that
it
peace
was
part is
just
so
saying,
important.
"This is here, I'll pay for you to do this." There's no,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna twist your elbow to say you have to do it, but
right.
it's just there, and so we try to think about ways that we can improve people's mental health and just peace with themselves,
Yep.
and it's been
No,
really
and
great.
that's then, they'll be, so much better a member of community, either your work community or their own community at home if they are, taking care of themselves and finding in some inner peace from time to time. So,
Definitely.
yeah, that's great. Great to hear.
So that's a good way to wrap up,
Yeah,
this episode. Dan, thank you so much for being on. Today's episode had Dan Chu, Executive Director of the Sierra Club Foundation. I really appreciate this conversation, Dan.
yeah, for sure. Thanks.